Well, hello, everybody, and happy St. Patrick's Day. Hope that you're having a dry day and you're out of the wind. Speaking of St. Patrick's Day, saw some pictures from early this morning. If you were listening to our program yesterday, you listened to our conversation with Brendan Doherty down there at the Old Triangle, and he was expecting to see a lineup of people early this morning. I think the doors opened at least at his establishment. Around 7 o'clock this morning, I saw some pictures pre-7 o'clock, and despite the pouring rain and the 90-kilometer-an-hour gusts of wind, there were still some hardy folks that had lined up in their rain gear and were kind of standing as close to the buildings as they could to stay dry. But they did it, and they were the first in line. They're a hardy bunch, I'll tell you what. Anyway, just saw the CBC is there. Brett Ruskin does his annual pilgrimage to the Old Triangle for coverage of our celebrations here in HRM every year, and I looked at some video of that a little bit earlier before I came on, and the place is packed. So enjoy, everybody. It's once a year. It's the only time of the year that if you drink a green beer, you're not going, what is wrong with this? Anyway, but as we said yesterday, if you're going to get out there and celebrate, power to you, but be smart about it, right? Anyway, are the rest of you hunkering down this morning? What a storm yesterday. We had Alistair Alders, our meteorologist, on the program yesterday, kind of giving us a heads up of what was to come, and it certainly did, and is certainly continuing to do so, and to the top ends, I think, of the scale that Alistair was talking about yesterday. I was up around, I don't even know what it was, 4:15 or 4:30 this morning, and in my neighborhood in Clayton Park, there was a massive thunderclap, just this big roll of thunder, and it's wintertime. Well, it's the end of wintertime, but we're definitely not used to thunderstorms, so that was something that woke me up, and all night with the wind gusting and the wind slapping against the windows. I don't think I'm the only bleary-eyed person out there this morning who lost a little sleep to this storm. Now, we know that there is and there are several power outages as a result of the storm today. Nova Scotia Power is reporting on their website about, I think it's somewhere around 26,000 outages right now. Halifax seems to be leading the charge on that. It's 8,100 in Halifax. In Dartmouth, about 3,500 over in Chester. They're just starting to get onto the map now. There's only about 5 there. But other places like Sackville are seeing about 9,000 outages. St. Margaret's Bay, about 289. But we're not exclusive. This is looks like it's happening right across much of the province. On my drive in this morning, you all know that I commute in on the 102, and I saw a pair of Nova Scotia Power trucks that were holding up poles that looked like they have snapped at the bottom. That was on Bears Road, just on the outbound side at Romans Avenue. And that was tying up traffic both outbound and, of course, with the lights that are at Romans Avenue, those were flashing reds this morning because I assume of that outage. It was certainly tying up traffic out there. So if you are driving around in this, headlights on, folks, and patience. Pack the patience. The good news is that Alistair's telling me that this rain and this wind will start to taper off throughout the day today and be a little more reasonable tonight. And the other part of this story is the other shoe that is to drop is that we're going to see temperatures dip below zero tonight. It's going to go from whatever it was. I think it was 12. When I got up this morning, it was 12 degrees. It's going to go all the way down to -4 tonight. So anything that's wet will likely have some ice on it tomorrow, just a heads up there. But I got to tell you, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that has had noticed this morning, but the day yesterday and the overnight temperatures being as warm as they were and all that wind blowing stuff around, the snow's gone. There was, the big plow banks we have a parking lot where I live, and plow truck kind of stacks all the snow in the same spot, and that I thought was going to be around till May. Well, there's about a chunk of it left at about the size of the base of a snowman, and that's about it. We're going to talk to Dr. Rob about this today. I have a theory. I have a theory that when it gets really warm, we know that fog eats snow. That's a well-known maritime fact. But I also have a theory that when it's really warm and we have a strong wind, that helps or aids in the snowmelt. Anyway, we'll ask Dr. Rob that as part of Science Files today, and that's going to happen in hour number 3. I hope that you can stick around for that. Do you know that this coming Friday, and I'm looking at Vanessa Veinotte, who's on the other side of the glass, who does a fantastic job, is the first day of spring? So we're almost there, folks. Meteorological spring happened, of course, on the 1st of March, but the first day of quote-unquote spring happens on Friday. So does that mean that it's time for us to retire the big snow boots and the shovels and the winter tires? I don't know if it's time for the winter tires, but I'll tell you what, I was certainly looking at the golf shirts this morning, despite all this wind and rain, and looking at them thinking, oh, it's only a few days away. Anyway, first day of spring happens on Friday. Halifax Water. Yeah, we've kind of stopped talking about Halifax Water, but that customer portal remains offline today, well over a week. It was, the 6th of March when this unauthorized access was discovered, and that portal was shut down, and it remains shut down. And Halifax Water saying that, not really saying much other than to say that an investigation is underway, and that the portal will remain off until that investigation is complete. So we've reached out to Halifax Water to see if they want to come on the show. They say there's not a lot to talk about, so we'll keep trying. Internationally, the United States obviously at the forefront of global news these days, and worldwide news, and we'll talk about the war in Iran in a second. But I don't know if you saw the comments from the President of the United States yesterday about Cuba, and some concern now that the President may be turning some of his attention to the Caribbean nation. There was an island-wide blackout in Cuba last night. The entire island, I think there's 3 million people or whatever it was, the number, without power because their thermo generating sites have been offline because of a lack of fuel. This is the third time there's been widespread outages in Cuba in 4 months. Yesterday, the president had a bunch of media availabilities, and there was wide-ranging interviews, that's for sure, and topics of discussion. But one of the things that he said in an interview, or at least an availability yesterday, was that it may be his honor to take Cuba. You heard the clips in the newscast here just before we came on the air. The president saying if they take it or they free it, it's completely up to him, and it would be his honor to do so. So is that the next intervention that we see in the world on the behest of the President of the United States? We saw his regime change, I guess we can call that, in Venezuela, and now we're seeing the same thing, we think, although not entirely sure what the end game is in Iran at this point. And now he's talking about Cuba. It was interesting. I was, just before I came on the air, I was listening to an interview with the ranking Democrat on the Foreign Relations Committee in the U.S. Congress, and she said that the Congress has completely lost control of the goings on of the president. He just kind of does what he wants to do. Scary times, folks. And of course, the war in Iran continues. Israel said this morning that it's killed a top Iranian security official. But that's not been yet confirmed. At least it wasn't when it came on the air by the Iranians or by the international community. This fellow is one of the top-ranking officials in the Iranian government. A couple of their neighbors, the UAE, seem to have been the target yesterday, right? I think they reported somewhere along the lines of intercepting about 10 missiles and 45 drones that were fired at them from Iran. And intercepting most of them. I think there was an oil tank that was hit in the UAE that doesn't really do a lot of damage to the economy, but it certainly makes for great television with those big plumes of black smoke, right? Doha also downing a bunch of missiles and drones that were launched at them. Israel reporting air raid sirens through the night last night and into today. All of this continuing as the President of the United States and the U.S. military say that they've decimated the Iranian military. So read into that as you will. And you can imagine that this is having an impact on oil prices. We had a conversation yesterday with our good friend Patrick DeHaan from Gas Buddy, who said that if this becomes prolonged and each day it gets longer, that we continue to see oil prices increase, that it, although unlikely, not out of the realm of possibility that we could see oil go as high as $200 a barrel. It is up significantly today. Brent crude up by about 2%. It's just over $102 a barrel. American, West Texas as up 1.5%, and that's about $94. The number that you and I and our neighbors and friends are looking at is that gasoline number, right? And it's up just about 2.5% in New York today. So we saw a little bit of a decline yesterday on the oil prices, and today those declines have been reversed, and now we're on the way up again. So we'll keep an eye on the oil prices and what that means for you. And of course, if we hear anything from the Nova Scotia Energy Board with regards to interrupter clauses, either up or down, we will certainly pass those along to you here on the program. Lots to talk about today. We're all going to open up those telephone lines afternoon today. Don't forget, at 11 o'clock today, as we normally do. And I'm looking forward to your comments on those or other topics. One of the topics that has been talked about quite a bit here is a plan to build a new community and a bunch of road work in the Hammonds Plains area between Hammonds Plains Road and Sandy Lake to Highway 101. There was a request for proposals released yesterday that's seeking a consultant to take a look at environmental impacts in the project area. Sustainable Cities Coordinator with the Ecology Action Centre, Jillian Ramsay, will be your guest when we come back. You're listening to The Todd Veinotte Show. I'm Dan Alstrand. Glad you're here. We're back in minutes. Welcome back. It was a discussion around the water cooler this morning with those gusts of wind that we saw early this morning and continuing now, and this rain and some of the power outages. Obviously not even close to the same scale, but it is reminiscent of some of the effects that we felt in the aftermath of some of the big storms that have blown in off the Atlantic here in HRM in the form of hurricanes. And again, it's not obviously the same scale, but it's very interesting that the radio station, we're on emergency power right now. Our power is out, like many of you are today as well. And some of the things that get picked as essential services, right? Have zero lights in the studio. My computer works, obviously, and the transmitter and the microphones are working, so you can hear us. But everything else gets kind of shut down here, except for my fan. My fan works. So it must be on one of those circuits, the good circuits, but everything else is dark. Anyway, I'd like to keep the air moving around in here. Boy, in today's world, we're bombarded, absolutely bombarded by things trying to sell us stuff, and that's not just on the traditional media, the televisions, or on the radio or in the newspaper if you still read that, but online you don't have to go very far before you start to see ads, and most of them targeted at something that you've searched or something that you're interested in, and that's how the advertising works. But included in some of those advertising campaigns, not in the campaigns, but included with those advertisements, can be things that are pretty scary and can do a lot of damage, not only to your gear, but also to your bank accounts. And those, of course, are scams. And a new operation has been launched. It launched yesterday. It involves law enforcement agencies in both Canada, the United States, and the UK, which is being called a coordinated real-time crackdown on crypto investment and approval phishing scams. This is a global international problem and very difficult to try and police. At least that's what I believe. I'm very pleased to welcome into the show today to tell us a little bit more the head of security advisory over there at BMO. That's Larry Zelvin. Larry, how are you?
Good morning, Dan. How are you?
These things must be extremely difficult to try and track down because they don't live in one place.
Well, when you look at fraud overall, there's some frauds that are a little bit more forgiving than others. But when you get to cryptocurrency fraud, it's really one of the most difficult challenges there are out there. I mean, it's still relatively new. Law enforcement is still learning how these things are going and how to investigate them. And unfortunately, in many cases, the perpetrators, the criminals, are not in the same country as us. And then recovery is sometimes next to impossible. So there's a lot out there to face, folks, but cryptocurrency is one of those areas that I'm glad the U.S. and Canada and the UK are focusing on because it's an area where people are losing a ton of money.
I have a cryptocurrency wallet just to see what the whole thing was about. There's nothing in it now because I took it all out. But that all being said, I can distinctly remember when I was going through the process of building my crypto account, the warnings that once something leaves that wallet, it's very difficult to track it down.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are legitimate cryptocurrency sites, right? So we're going to talk about the worst case scenarios where you get fraud, but there are legitimate sites out there that people want to go and invest in that way, by all means, but be very, very careful. Because look, there's a number of scams out there. There's things like the phishing scams where they try and get users to grant access to their wallet. You should never give anybody access to your wallet. There's a lot of Ponzi and pyramid schemes out there, promises of really high returns, paying investors, these really crazy numbers. I will tell you, I personally was involved in helping somebody who lost $4 million. That's right, folks, $4 million, and was about to take out another $500,000 loan on their house, because that's how they thought they were going to get their money back. You've got to be careful of people who have created these fake tokens for non-fungible tokens to raise funds and then disappear as the investors or have worthless assets. And then the last thing I would say is just be careful. There are folks out there that are creating these platforms that look like they're legitimate cryptocurrency sites, and they're not. So a lot to be knowledgeable of before you get into this area for investment, because there's a lot of people out there trying to take advantage of you.
Tell me a little bit about the enforcement of this and how you try to track these things down. As you mentioned earlier, Larry, that law enforcement is kind of playing a catch up on this because it's an emerging market.
It is absolutely an emerging market, and again, it's folks are excited to hear about cryptocurrency and the potential for monetary gain. And look, there is that opportunity out there, but it's also the opportunity for the fraudsters. But this Operation Atlantic, which is being done by Canada, U.S., and the U.K., it's solely being focused on, which is not a bad thing, this thing called approval phishing attacks. And what they do is they trick victims into granting wallet access. Using fake alerts, using trusted apps and services, and folks are getting control of their crypto wallets, and then they move funds out, and it's on the blockchain, and it becomes untraceable and unrecoverable.
Right.
So it's sinister. There's a company called Chainalysis. They say that this is roughly a $14 billion crime in 2025 alone.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
It is. It's a massive amount of money. And look, for some folks, it could be hundreds of dollars, which is significant. Then again, in other cases that I've dealt with, it's in the millions.
All right. So as I mentioned off the top, Larry, if you're on social media, you're no doubt getting inundated by these pop-ups or these alerts or these quote unquote ads. What should we be wary of? What are the flags? What should we be on the lookout for?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is there's a common theme of urgency. People are really making you or trying to get you to do things quicker than you would normally. There's all of a sudden a really great deal. You've got to do it now. You're going to get all these great benefits if you do. You've got to be careful with unsolicited calls, emails, texts, social media. If you don't know who they are, you probably shouldn't be talking to them. And if you do, you may want to spend a little time researching to make sure they are legitimate. Be very careful if conversations move to private or encrypted channels, because, well, if the social media sites and obviously email and text are getting better at detecting, but if they take you to a private or encrypted channel, that's their way of avoiding detection. And then really watch people who are asking you for personal identification, asking you for PINs, one-time passcodes. or access to your wallet, so your cryptocurrency. But things like that should really give you a sense of, boy, something's not right, and it's time to probably call law enforcement, maybe call your financial institution, and definitely call the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center so they can potentially help you.
Is an approach like Operation Atlantic, where we're putting several jurisdictions together to combat this, the right approach?
I think it is. I think there needs to be a lot more cooperation, international cooperation in particular. But the more we can all focus on this, I think it was like a community watch, right? I mean, same thing when you get into those silver alerts and amber alerts. I am a big fan of folks working together on these things because I can think we can not only learn well from each other, but also hopefully share information in a way that not only disrupts these things, but supports the victims and also educates the public about these threats.
Larry, I appreciate your time today.
Dan, thank you so much, folks. Good luck with the weather in Halifax, and I hope you recover soon.
All right, Larry, appreciate it. That is Larry Zelvin. He is the head of security advisory at BMO. We are very lucky to live where we do. I know I say it a lot. Some of you send me emails and say I might say it too much, but I am very, very happy to be living in Nova Scotia. And part of the reason why we're very lucky to live where we are is we have access to some places that you really can't get access to anywhere else in the world, right? We've got beaches, we've got shoreline, we've got access to the Atlantic Ocean from stem to stern, bow to stern on the province, right? So there aren't a lot of places in the world that can say that. All of that being said, access to said locations is becoming increasingly difficult in 2026 as properties are sold that have been traditional entry points into some of the more secluded, some of those little secret beaches that you don't tell anybody about. You know what I'm talking about? Anyway, there's a symposium that is coming to our part of the world next week that is dealing with coastal access. It's called the First International Coastal Access Symposium. And we're going to take a look at it when we come back with the Assistant Professor of Marine Affairs Program at Dalhousie. That's Dr. Hannah Harrison. You're listening to The Todd Veinotte Show. I'm Dan Holstrand. We're back in a minute. Here's what we do know. We know that HRM was ranked by a study, I think it was done by TomTom in January, as having the third worst traffic behind Toronto and Vancouver, particularly when it comes to congestion. The province has been talking about ways to alleviate congestion probably since it took power in the first term, and it certainly has been on the minds of city councillors as the budget process within HRM unfolded this year. All of that being said, there is a lot of people with a lot of ideas on how we can reduce congestion, but at this point, nothing has really come forward. The province has now put out a request for proposal to take a look at the environmental impacts of one of their plans to reduce congestion, particularly on Highway 102, that chunk, and those of you that drive it every day are super familiar with this, right? That chunk that encapsulates the rifle range and then goes up the big hill and then works its way around towards Kearney Lake, right? And that's a busy piece of infrastructure. We've got traffic coming in from the Trailway out on Highway 102. We've got traffic coming from 101. We've got traffic coming through the northern parts of Burnside and such. It's a busy piece of road. So the province has proposed that they would like to build a connector that would connect Highway 101 to, I do believe it's Hammonds Plains Road, so that it would take some of that traffic from 101 off and put it onto this connector. But that's part of the plan. There's also a plan to add, I think, 6,000 units worth of development along that piece as well. And there are some that think this is a brilliant idea, that it's a good way to get some of the traffic off the 102, but others are concerned for some of the wilderness and some of the lakes in that area, particularly Sandy Lake. I'm very pleased to welcome to the show today to tell us a little bit more is the Sustainable Cities Coordinator at the Ecology Action Centre, and that's Jillian Ramsay. Jillian, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I am well. So this request for proposals is to get somebody to do an environmental impact on this. I know you've been watching this thing unfold very closely and have been studying it. What kind of potential impacts will that connector have in the Sandy Lake area?
Yeah, Sandy Lake is, a really ecologically valuable area in HRM. And so any development happening surrounding Sandy Lake would not only pose a risk to the wildlife there, but also the surrounding communities. So Sandy Lake is home to 15 rare and endangered species, including the Atlantic salmon, that is very vulnerable to any sort of siltation or pollution runoff, changing the pH of its water. There are also pockets of old-growth forest around Sandy Lakes, of which there is less than 1% of old growth left in the province. So definitely important to protect it when you come across it. And I think it's important to recall that, all of this wildlife is beautiful and worth protecting in its own right, but it also performs valuable ecosystem functions and services that serve residents of HRM and beyond. So, floods and fires are becoming increasingly a problem in HRM as the climate crisis worsens. And these areas of wilderness that have wetlands are acting as natural flood and fire breaks during these disasters. They also filter our air and water and sequester carbon. So protecting the ecosystem here is definitely of the utmost importance, not only for wildlife itself, but the communities that are around it.
The Houston government and the minister responsible, Fred Tilley, are touting this connector, Jillian, as a way to get some of the traffic off of Highway 102 that a colleague of mine calls Thunderdome. That being said, with this big development, this 6,000 unit development that's also proposed as part of this plan, you don't think that that's going to accomplish its goal?
Yeah, I think you really asked the right question there. The connector that's being proposed is projected to go right through this Sandy Lake special planning area, where anywhere from 6,000, some places I'm hearing more units of housing are being proposed to go. And so it begs the question, is this going to be a connector that is providing egress and reducing traffic, or is this going to be an on and off ramp for a new community? And even thinking about it as egress and as a relief for traffic outside of a proposed development, whether or not that happens, we know that increasing lanes does not reduce traffic. The fallacy of induced demand, is something we need to consider. When driving becomes perceived as easier due to more lanes, as well as a lack of transit solutions in that area, more people are going to choose to drive and take that specific route, and it's going to increase traffic all the same in an area that's already a nightmare to drive through.
Jillian, during the open here, I said that there was a study that was done that shows that Halifax and HRM has the third most traffic congestion in Canada. If we don't build new lanes and new roads, how do we alleviate that problem?
Yeah, it's really important to be solution-oriented. HRM is certainly growing very, very quickly, and traffic is going to come with that because we currently don't have infrastructure for supporting people in active transit and transportation methods in place for the population demand, but it is something HRM in the province I know are working on, along with many community groups and organizations such as EAC. I think it's really important to consider that if we are developing new communities outside of the urban service boundary, so outside of where municipal services are extended to, these become car-dependent communities. And so instead of helping to support traffic, we are actually adding more cars to the road because people now are forced to drive to all essential services, grocery stores, childcare, schools, doctor's offices, even work. Like all of these things become car dependent. And, that isn't going to help alleviate traffic whatsoever. And it's also not helping address the affordable housing crisis. By forcing people into communities where driving is the only solution, that's putting an additional cost of living for people that will be moving into those areas.
That being said, we are. You said that the city is growing, and we're seeing more and more people move here. And to be honest, the city is getting to the point where I've been told that the Halifax Peninsula is getting back to its historical highs when it comes to population. Is it conceivable that we do have to move outside the core in order to put people into housing?
Absolutely. I think, the Ecology Action Centre is very pro-development. We do want to see development happen. We just want it to be done in the right way that is centering environment and community first in the decisions that are being made. An example of this is focusing on development on brownfield sites as well as within the urban service boundary. So this is astronomically more affordable for residents when we are densifying within the urban service boundary, which includes the urban core, but also a lot of the suburban area as well. And this densification here, is going to put more tax dollars towards improving existing services. When we expand outside of that urban service boundary with new developments, there aren't services there. And so in order to get them serviced, we not only need to pay to put in that servicing, but then maintain it in perpetuity. And so that's just one example of how sprawl costs us all, right, is extending those services. It's going to fall back on HRM taxpayers, no question.
We've certainly seen an example of that in West Bedford, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
At the end of the day, we're in the first stages of this process. The province has put that RFP out for people for a person to come and do a study on the environmental impact of this. I would imagine that organizations and groups, community groups that are organizing on this, and yourselves will be active in any kind of environmental study that is done.
Yeah, we'll do our best to. I mean, the province is going to hire an organization or a company to do what they do best. I think any environmentalist worth their salt will see the significant ecological value of Sandy Lake and identify through the multitude of research that's been done over the decades now that this fight has been active, that Sandy Lake is not an environmentally sustainable place for us to be growing. And we are going to have to lose some green space to development. There's no question that is a realistic perspective. But there's a reason that we're fighting so hard for Sandy Lake, and it's because it is an ecologically valuable, highly significant piece of wilderness in our urban core that is serving us in so many ways. And so, we really have to look at the value of green space, and Sandy Lake is upper echelon. We really should not be touching it.
Jillian, appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Take care.
That is Jillian Ramsay, the Sustainable Cities Coordinator at the Ecology Action Centre. Province has put out now a request for proposals for a company or a person to come forward and do an environmental study and an assessment on the risks of building that connector that would connect the 101 to Hammonds Plains Road. The province's effort to help to ease some congestion. I wonder if that's going to be enough to make an impact. It's not that long a road, and people are still going to get spilled onto the 102, right? If not, they're going to go down Carney Lake Road and onto the Bedford Highway, which is also a mess. We, along with about 23,000 other Nova Scotia Power customers, are without electricity. The radio station lights just went out. It's going to be one of those days, folks. I hope that you can still hear us. And if you can, I hope that you can stick around. We're going to take a break for the news. The show continues on the other side. You are listening to the Todd Veinotte Show in the dark. It's mood lighting today. We're back after the news. All right, welcome back. If you walk in and have a discussion with a Nova Scotian and are able to drag the information out of them, which is not easy to do, everybody's got a piece of paradise, I'll call it, here in this province that they migrate to, usually in the summertime, some all year round. That's that little secret beach, that little rocky shoreline, that little chunk of Nova Scotia that just kind of puts you in balance, right? I have several of them because I'm kind of out of balance. But that being said, we've seen several instances as of late of some of those pieces of paradise, access being restricted to them for a variety of reasons. Sometimes there's an ownership change. Sometimes there's something else happens, and access points that we've been using for many years have kind of disappeared. So there's a symposium that is going to happen on the 26th of March here in Halifax. It's a free event. It's called the International Coastal Access Symposium, and I'm very pleased to welcome to the show today to give us a little bit of context on this, tell us a little bit more about what the symposium is about, Dr. Hannah Harrison, who is the Assistant Professor in Marine Affairs over there at Dalhousie University. Dr. Harrison, how are you?
Hey, good morning. Thanks so much for having me. I'm doing well.
Do you have a secret beach?
I don't know about a secret beach. I live close to the peninsula here in Halifax, so I feel like my beaches are also everybody's beaches here.
Right. But there are several that, and it's secret to one person, but several people know where they are. And I know that it's all the way along the shoreline here of Nova Scotia that people have been using access points and trails and been going to those places for a long time. And sometimes when things change, that access gets restricted. Is that kind of what you're looking at here in part of this symposium?
You really hit the nail right on the head there. That's very much what we're interested in with the symposium. Yes, I think your intro really described one of the challenges of coastal access in Nova Scotia so nicely. Like, we talk about being Canada's ocean playground.
Right.
But then we also talk about who actually has the access to the playground? It can be really hard to find access in Nova Scotia, and often the access is not so accessible to everybody, right? You have to have a car. If you've got any mobility challenges, there might not be an easy way to get down. Maybe you have to hop a guardrail or climb over some rocks. And we're also seeing a lot of changes with respect to how the coastline is being developed. So Obviously, private property owners, they have a right to develop their property. They have a right to ask other people to stay off their property. I think we all can agree that those are some pretty important parts of why people like to own their properties. But on the other hand, that those can have some really strong impacts on how people get to the beach. So I think, you were talking about everyone's got their favorite spot. I think most Nova Scotians can also remember, hey, maybe there was that lot that was right next to the beach. And when I was a kid, everyone just walked across it. And then a few years ago, somebody bought it and now there's a house there and you can't get there that way.
Right.
And we talk about that as being kind of this informal style of access where people have been using access that maybe wasn't public for a long time or maybe thought it was public. And then sometimes there's a bit of a rude moment later when they go, oh, I actually can't use that anymore. And that can feel like a really big loss to folks. So those, amongst other topics, are what this symposium will deal with. So it's a group of people. We're going to have speakers from Canada, from Jamaica, New Zealand, the U.S., Mexico, Grenada in the Caribbean. And we'll be asking them to talk about just the way that access looks in all of those different places. And it's really interesting how diverse both the laws and the policies that dictate how access occurs in different countries or even in different provinces can look. And so we're really excited to bring all of those things together. It is a free event. We do ask people to register so we can send them the Zoom link so that they can join. But otherwise, it's designed to have short presentations and for the public to be able to ask questions and also take part in some of the outputs that we'll create from the symposium.
Obviously, when we bring in a bunch of people from a bunch of different countries and different jurisdictions and different laws, it's kind of about trying to find a balance, right, of protecting somebody's private property, but also ensuring that Nova Scotians have access to the shoreline.
Absolutely. I think in some countries, access to the shoreline is considered a right. It is considered part of what makes life there worth living. It's part of that those human rights, that quality of life that I think everyone's pretty interested in. We do not have that right here in Nova Scotia. So though we do have a public strip of land around the province, more or less like kind of a bath covering, if you will, that sits between the mean high water mark and the mean low water mark. So you have a right to be there in most places. But you have no right to get there in Nova Scotia unless there's public property or some other arrangement. And so those are the kind of things that we'll be talking about, but we'll also be hearing from advocacy groups. So it won't just be academics. It will also be other folks who are working actively in this type of issue and are trying to help communities navigate sometimes those changes or come up with ways that we can make access more accessible, if you will.
Right. So coming up with ideas on moving forward and and granting or giving the tools to different jurisdictions that may want to enshrine this kind of access into law or into perpetuity.
Exactly. And that, as you say, definitely involves working respectfully with landowners.
Right.
We have examples in the province of private property owners who, did come from away and did change, say, the development on their property, but chose to retain access for the local community who had been using it long before that property owner arrived. So there are great examples out there of ways that this has worked. But unfortunately, it is quite context specific. That particular person had that particular idea in mind. Maybe that's their value. So we're trying to figure out ways that make it easier for property owners to make those choices. Maybe that's limiting liability. Maybe that's coming up with a code of conduct. Even though I, of course, advocate for coastal access to my last breath here, there is certainly also the trade-off of when the public visits what they think to be a public space. Sometimes not everyone is thinking about, do I bring my trash home with me? Do I clean up after my dog? And those kinds of negative interactions can really erode away that public trust, that private landowner interest in providing access. So I think there's kind of this rights but also responsibilities discussion that definitely needs to be had. Certainly we do that with the hiking community. We think about leave no trace, but we don't really apply some of those same ideas to the coast. We don't really have a similar thing that fits to like beach access. So trying to think as like a community, both from our international expertise, but also like all of the projects operating here in Nova Scotia, how could we be doing that better? How can we figure out a way to make access really, really accessible?
All right, so Dr. Harrison, when and where and how do we take part?
Sure thing. So if people would like to join, they can go to coastalaccessproject.com. And then they can follow the link. There's one button right there at the top of the page that will lead them to the registration page. It's a super easy form. It shouldn't take you more than 15 seconds to fill out. And then you will get sent a link here in the next week to join us on Thursday, March 26th. And it starts at 9 a.m. and we'll finish up around 4 p.m. that day.
Dr. Harrison, appreciate your time.
Hey, thank you so much. I appreciate your interest.
That is Dr. Hannah Harrison, Assistant Professor of Marine Affairs at Dalhousie University. Coastal Access Project Symposium happens on the 26th. You can all think of your trips to the beach, not necessarily, well, even to the public beaches, the Crystal Crescents or the Rainbow Havens of the world, and the mess that people leave behind, right? It's quite disgusting, to be quite honest, and it doesn't even have to be a beach, right? As you well know, I spend a lot of time on area lakes and rivers, and I usually come out of the woods with a bag full of garbage that I pick as I go along, and that is why we run into problems with access and landowners, because people leave their stuff all over the place. It's somebody has to pick it up, right? And that tends to be part of the problem. Anyway, that'll be an interesting seminar. I hope that some of you can participate in it. We're going to stop. We're going to get an update here on the news at the top of the hour and on the other side of it. So we are going to open up the telephone lines. It's time for the Tuesday open hour. The number is 902-405-6000 or 1-877-801-8255. That is the number. Regular rules apply, folks. You can bring anything to the table that you want. If it's something we've talked about this week, we'll certainly continue that discussion. If it's something that you haven't talked about this week, we can certainly start that discussion. And I'm looking forward to chatting with you. Again, 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. The open hour after the news. Welcome back. This is the Todd Veinotte Show. It is the Tuesday open hour. The telephone lines are now open, everybody. 102. I was talking about the highway just before I came on. 902-405-6000 or 1-877-801-8255. Give me a break. It's dark in here, all right? 902-405-6000. 1-877-801-8255. As I mentioned before the break, regular rules apply. You can bring whatever it is that's on your mind to our open hours. That's the way that we do it here. A couple of things, obviously. We had a discussion a little bit earlier, at least I had a discussion or a little bit of a rant on the very latest that came out of a couple of availabilities with the President of the United States yesterday. There was a rather long news-y conference with the President of the United States as he sat with the board of the now Trump Kennedy Center, getting ready to put that place on pause for a couple of years for renovations, at least according to the president. And then there was another. I think there was a White House availability yesterday, and one of the lots of obviously wide-ranging topics were discussed during the chat with the president. A couple of things that I took away, at least from the first one, was that he continues to not be pleased. I think is probably the way I can describe that best with some of the U.S. allies after he put out the call on the weekend for allied nations to send their military navy into the Persian Gulf to help with the Strait of Hormuz. As I understand it, a lot of nations haven't responded. Some have just flat out said no. And it made me think, if you go back not that far in history, if we were in a situation and Donald Trump isn't the president of the United States and all of the stuff that comes along with Donald Trump, if the president of the United States put out that same call, I think we would already be seeing fueling efforts underway here at the dockyard and ships getting ready to deploy. We've seen it in the past. But that's not happening this time around. France has said no. Germany says this isn't a NATO fight. Canada says it is not participating. So, and the UK hedging, Keir Starmer hedging his bet, saying that he's working with allies to find a solution. But it's very interesting the lack of nations that have picked up the ball that the president of the United States threw on the weekend. Also, the president of the United States addressing the situation in Cuba. If you haven't heard, Cuba has had another island-wide blackout last night because of lack of generation capacity. That island has been suffering with a fuel shortage. They do make their own, but they also import a lot of it, most of it coming from Venezuela. And that isn't happening now. The president of the United States saying yesterday that he may have the honor of taking Cuba. He said freeing it or just taking it. It's his call, which has some suggesting that we may see an effort in Cuba like we perhaps saw in Venezuela, or maybe something a little more stringent in order to unseat that government and effect regime change. This would be the third time around in recent months, right? We saw regime change in Venezuela, where we were told that this was partially, we don't really know, and it's kind of tragic that we don't know what the end game is for the Americans in Iran right now. We get it that it's trying to stop the Iranians from gaining a nuclear weapon, but at the beginning, this was about knocking the government out and for the people to rise up. So it could be regime change. We don't really know. And now there's open discussion of regime change in Cuba. The Democrats on the Foreign Relations Committee in the United States have said they've lost control of the president. What do you think? What I do know is that Canadians are united in their opposition to any kind of war in Iran. Angus Reid put out some numbers today that shows that three-quarters, about 74% of Canadians that were polled, say Canada's military should not be involved in this conflict. About 15% of people that were polled didn't take a position on it, and about 10% were disagree with that statement, that they are in favor. It's interesting that this kind of breaks down even more into where you fall politically. About 10% of Canadians support military involvement in the Middle East. That rises to 21% among past CPC voters, conservative voters, and drops to 3% and 5% for the Liberals and the New Democrats, respectively. 3/4 of Canadians polled said that they've been following this war very closely. That rises to 87% among men over the age of 55 and drops to about 58% among women younger than 35. But the top line of that one is 75%, well, 74% of Canadians oppose military involvement in the war in Iran. Your thoughts on that? 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255 to the phones, and we say hello this morning again to Dave. Dave, how are you?
Happy St. Patty's Day. Did you see them all lining up last night in this wretched weather?
Yeah, I saw the pictures this morning.
The lineup started early still. You got to hand it to the Irish here in Halifax.
There are some hardy people out there.
Now we're sitting in the dark just like Cuba again here.
I am right in the dark.
Yeah,
it's wild.
We've been losing our power on and off here, so bear with the internet here. So we're in Bedford, and it's been flickering on and off. So here we go. We're just like Cuba. But I'd like to talk about Cuba.
Sure.
I've had the good fortunes of traveling to Cuba many times. I'd say half dozen times. Family and as a couple, my wife and I go down there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the reasons Canadians travel there is, let's be real, it's cheap. It's inexpensive. It's a pipeline from here. It's about 5-hour flight to get to Havana or Mexico, or pardon me, Cuba. And you have a cold crystal beer in your hand as you arrive at the airport. I think the last around COVID time, my wife and I went down. We paid, believe it or not, $700. It was a resort that was like a 2-star, 3-star. So a 5-star doesn't exist in Cuba. And folks, if you go to Cuba, you don't go there to eat. The food is never great. But again, I'm not that picky, right? I'm okay with that. But I've also talked to a lot of Cubans down there. They're mostly very well. They're educated.
Yeah,
right?
for
That's
sure.
one thing. The folks are there. Have you been there, Dan, yourself?
No, not myself, but I certainly know a number of Cuban people who tell me that that education is widely available to Cuban people.
It is, and now what education they're given, I don't know. Now we have to remember too, folks, that it is a communist country.
It is.
It's a communist country that does not allow an opposition and severely restricts any talk about politics down there. It's banned, basically. So, but I was able to talk to some educated people that were, I guess they're hosts when you go to the hotel and they beat the buses, very educated people. And they have to be careful what they say. But the last time, and of course, COVID knocked the hell out of the world, right, including Cuba. They want change. They want change. They look across the water there and 50 miles to the Keys in Florida, basically very close. And many of their family, I talked to the folks, and many of their young people, their family, their kids were able to leave, and they're in Miami or they're in the United States doing very well. And this is what they want. They do want change. They're living in the dark half the time or most of the time. The food is okay at the resort.
They're living in the dark, Dave, because the fuel's been cut off from Venezuela by the Americans under the embargo.
Right. We actually went through blackouts while we were down there before this whole thing.
But that embargo's been on since the Bay of Pigs, so it's been on for a long time.
That's right. And every U.S. government has had to deal with Cuba because their ties with Russia. And right now we are fighting Russia on several fronts. Not fighting necessarily. We're trying to squeeze them off. And Russia provided, not just in tourism, they were second behind Canadians in tourism in Cuba. I met a lot of Russians down there. And I was down there, Dan, when the war started in Ukraine. It was a Wednesday. I was watching CNN in our hotel, having my little siesta in the heat of the day. And you got 4 channels, Chinese, Canadian, and some CNN. And the war started on a Wednesday when Russia invaded, right? And there was an Aeroflot plane, huge plane that was rerouted because the airspace was now closed to a lot of Russia airspace because of the ongoings there. And they drove it into Cuba. And a lot of Russians peeled off there, including a lot of Russian soldiers, by the way. So I don't think that had anything to do with anything. But Russia's a big supporter of Cuba. It provided Cuba with most of what it needed in its basically day-to-day usage of things, including fuel.
Dave,
and we know Venezuela.
I don't want to cut you off, Dave, but I'm right up against the break, my friend.
No problem, Dan. Yep. I mean, if you want to hold me on, but I don't want to hog the lines. But I will say with Cuba, Dan, it's a wonderful place. But again, we're going to see some change there soon.
All right,
I
Dave.
think it's going to be positive. Thank you, Dan.
Appreciate that. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. When we come back, we're going to get an update on the power situation with Nova Scotia Power. I hope you can stick around for that. We're back in minutes. All right, welcome back. We'll get back to the that's easy for me to say. Welcome back. We'll get back to the open hour here in a moment, but there's an ongoing power situation here in Nova Scotia. There's well over 20,000 Nova Scotia Power customers that are currently without electricity as we continue to deal with our latest round with Mother Nature. Very pleased to welcome to the show the storm lead for Nova Scotia Power on this one. That's Jill Searle. Jill, how are you?
I am good, Dan. How are you?
I am well. I guess let's start with the update. What's the situation on the ground right now?
Well, as expected, we did receive high winds overnight and are continuing out throughout the day today. So we are experiencing outages across the province, primarily focused in the metro area at this time, but we do have crews positioned across the province to respond.
Obviously, when it comes to these gusty winds, and I think that most of the listeners, Jill, can appreciate that they were pretty strong earlier this morning. It makes it difficult for your crews to get up into those buckets and get these things fixed.
Yes, that is true. Our crews know to do a localized risk assessment every time they set up on a site to ascertain if it's safe for them to go aloft. So far today, we've not had to stand down our crews because of winds. They are out there restoring power in this weather.
Now, estimated restoration times obviously is an estimate, but they vary widely from a couple hours to later this evening. Is that because of the severity or access or a little both?
It's actually both. So both the number of customers that are impacted and the location of the outages can impact how long it will take us to restore. Your listeners would know we're dealing with some soggy locations across the province, and some of our back roads are difficult to traverse. So we're doing our best, and we do try to update our ETRs on our outage map so folks are aware when they could expect power to be restored.
Jill, have you seen any significant damage to infrastructure? I know on my way in this morning I saw a couple poles that had snapped at the bottom.
Yeah, that is pretty common in heavy winds like this, that we would see the load on the poles cause poles to break. That's primarily the damage that we're seeing. Still a lot of tree contacts that we would expect in weather like this as well. But for the most part, hopefully a quick restoration in the high winds.
Do you have enough crews available, or are you going to bring others in?
We sure do. We knew this was coming, so we reached out to our partners within the province to get additional power line technician crews in, and we always have lots of vegetation crews and traffic control folks who help support our restoration efforts. So it looks like we have about actually over 300 folks who are in the field right now who are helping to restore our customers.
Jill, is there a priority? Did the urban area more priority than the rural areas, or is it just kind of on a need basis?
It is on a need basis. We do have a restoration hierarchy that we would look to prioritize our restorations. So things like EMO type emergencies around hospitals, sewage treatment plants, water treatment plants are an infrastructure priority for us. And then we do approach it in outage by outage as a customer count typically. So our larger customer outages we try to restore first. And then as we work through that, through our three-phase lines, down to our single-phase lines, and then to individual customers.
For the bulk of the outages, particularly here in HRM, Jill, are we ballparking by early evening to have them restored?
Yes, we are. Those are fairly large outages, mostly because of the density of customers. So we have crews assigned to those outages now.
Jill, I know you're extremely busy. Appreciate a few minutes of your time today.
Appreciate your interest. Thank you.
That is Jill Searle, Storm Lead with Nova Scotia Power, as there's well over it's up to 22,000 outages across the province, including our radio station. So we're in there with you. It's we were on backup power, and I'm kind of like in the dark in here. Anyway, 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. Back to the open hour. David's been on hold. Thank you, David. Welcome to the show.
No problem. Thank you. That was interesting. How they get on and explain about power being out with high winds, and so it happens all the time, and it's the same answers. It's the same. I'm going to say tired of listening to it. It's the infrastructure.
Right.
It's the infrastructure. When are they going to admit to it? You know, it's like high winds. We've had high winds since I was a kid here. So have you. We've had storms. We've had, what is this, new? Like really? You want us to believe this? There's gusts of wind out there. Big deal. And what I mean by big deal is deal with it, but you can't because your infrastructure is broken. And to get on and say we're prepared and we have this and we have backup and we have crews, yeah, you always did. But it's your infrastructure, it's your company. It's broken. That's the problem. Do you agree with that or disagree?
Well, I mean, we see it quite frequently, and I'm not going to argue that point with you, David, at all, because it seems that whenever we get weather, we get a problem with the grid. The only solution to that, I think, would be to bury the lines, which is extremely costly, right?
Or repair the lines and repair the poles that are hanging down. Repair the poles that are twisted. Repair the poles that are rotten. Repair what you have. Everything doesn't have to go into the ground, Dan. That's not the answer to say, well, you know what, to fix this, let's put the lines underground. No, fix what you have there. Instead of having poles that are half, 60, 70 years, like they're not putting any money back in it.
Right.
That's obviously that's obviously the problem. If a line falls down, does a line fall down because it's been, it's a new line that's been there for 20, 30 years, or does it fall down because it's been there for 60 years? Who knows? They don't tell us. But that's some of the problem. That's the whole thing. And to say I get so frustrated listening to them come on there and say how good they are and how many crews they have and how safe they are and how much backup and they're ready for this. No, you're not. You're not ready for nothing. And my final comment is the guy that was on there about Cuba.
Sure.
There's 5 stars in Cuba and Veradero Beach and Holguin and Cayo Coco. There's 5 stars everywhere.
Yep.
There's no such thing as not 5 stars. And another thing is Canadians go to Cuba not because it's cheap, like he said, and if you don't mind not having food. They're very good people. They love Canadians. Why? And I'm going to say this because there's no Americans on the island. They're not allowed in.
You're not wrong. You're
and
absolutely
I'm not wrong. That's why we love going there. We love going there because there's no Americans, and you can take it like you want. You can take it with a grain of salt, but it's the truth. We go there because there's no Americans, not because it's cheap, not because of that, because they love Canadians. They're great people, great culture, and now you got someone on the cross border down here in another country making a mess of the world and involving them, which is going to involve us because that was our spot.
Right, and it very well soon could be an American island.
And it can speak without any say from anybody else in the world, including us Canadians, who I don't know what millions are put in there by Canadians, but I'm telling you, they love Canadians. There's Canadians and Europeans, and again, no Americans. That's why we go there. And it's not $700 to go there. I'm going to go there because it's cheap. You can't go to Cuba for $700. You might be able to fly there. But during the tourist season, when it was before Orange Face down there started making a mess, you couldn't fly there for $700. No, you went to Cuba because it was close, and you went there because of the people, the culture, and the way they respected you. Now, is that going to change? Probably. And why? Again, because of the clown on the other side of the border.
David, appreciate it, sir.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. The President of the United States said yesterday that he may have, and I quote, the honor of taking Cuba. We're back after the news. All right, welcome back. Open Hour continues. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. as many of you are hunkering down, and I would assume some of you listening to us on battery-powered radios as we continue to deal with a power outage from last night's storm. Well over 22,000 Nova Scotia Power customers currently in the dark, with estimated restoration times ranging any time from now until late this evening. So we'll keep you up to date with the latest information that we have, should it be made available. We say hello now to Ben. Ben, how are you?
I'm doing really well. How are you, Dan?
I'm in the dark today.
Nice. You got the candles on, or what?
Well, no, there's enough ambient light here, and I have computer monitors, so it's paradise by the monitor light today. Nice change, right? Yeah.
Oh, good.
It's on your mind.
Well, I called because I heard some guy call and rip the infrastructure about Nova Scotia Power, and I'm not a fan of Nova Scotia Power myself. However, I don't think it's fair to rip up the company because of the infrastructure. I mean, we have power lines and they're above ground, and there's nothing you can really do about it. And we have a lot of trees that are growing around the power lines. So eventually those trees are going to tag those lines, and we're going to have some outages. And since everybody's aware that we're a peninsula that's right on the East Coast, right there on the Atlantic Ocean, we're going to get these windstorms periodically. So eventually, inevitably, we're going to have these power outages, and there's really nothing we can do about it. So I just wanted to call and say thank you to all the crew members that are out there. I live in Stillwater Lake. We had our power shut off out here a couple times, maybe 3 times now this morning.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in Halliburton. There's a tree that fell on Buddy's property, just like a rock throw away from my place. And Nova Scotia Power, they were there within 5 minutes, man. And they cut that tree down, got it all cleaned up within a half hour, 45 minutes, and they're on their way to the next destination, and or maybe a coffee break at Tim Hortons. Who knows, right? But
good on them.
Right? Yeah, good on them. But, I mean, they're out there. They're in this weather. It's like we got bedrock. Bedrock is, granite is probably one of the most hardest rocks that are out there. We just can't put our power lines in the ground. I don't care how much money Nova Scotia Power makes. They can't afford anything like that and sustain like a company with any sort of profit. So, again, I want to repeat myself that Nova Scotia Power, I'm not a fan of your incompetence, but when it comes to the work that's done out there by your crew members, they do an excellent job, in my opinion. And I want to send them some thanks. And I also wanted to say that Donald Trump is, we've for decades we've ripped whoever is in power in the United States. We criticize. This is just what we do. We criticize, and I think that we've criticized so much so that it's just. It's just who we are, and whenever we have somebody like Donald Trump in the office, if we criticize somebody like that, how do you defer the difference between, like, say, George Bush or Jr. and Trump? Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that Donald Trump, he's taken advantage of their power. I think that they planned this way ahead of time. That they put Cuba into the position that they are right now, and United States is very desperate, and they're looking to acquire land, and I think it's an easy place for them to take, and I hope that it's going to happen. I think, but let's just hope that it doesn't explode into something more dramatic than what we would hope that it would be, I guess. But anyway, that's all I have to say,
Ben.
Dan. You have a great show, man.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank you so
it. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. I don't think anybody, and I guess I shouldn't speak for everyone, but I certainly don't suggest that the guys or the people that are on the ground at Nova Scotia Power aren't doing a fantastic job working with what they have, right? I think that that they tend to be overworked because of some of the issues that some of our callers have raised, right? It feels, and this is just my opinion, it feels that because of the extent of the network or the grid, that Nova Scotia Power is more reactionary than proactive when it comes to things like vegetation control and replacing poles, like our last caller said, waiting for them to have to do it as opposed to should do it, if that makes any sense. But to his point, to Ben's point, you can do anything. You can drill anywhere. You can put cables underground if we were able to drill holes to put other infrastructure underground. But the price tag would be just astronomically unaffordable for a province of our size. Anyway, appreciate the call, Ben. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. Hello, Barry.
Hi, I work with the Power Corporation, being a power engineer, and they could do that, and they could bring in 1,000 people to do all the trees and everything else, and they go to the Public Utilities Board and ask for a super, super high raise, and our bills all go up, and we'd still probably have trouble with storms. I mean, here on the coast, it's above ground. I think they do an awesome job. We've worked with them a lot. Back to the days when all the mills were going, we used to have interrupted power to keep costs down, so they didn't have to build a couple extra generators and have them on standby. I mean, they work hard. It's people. Basically, when we complain more out of ignorance. It's like when I did work with a capitalist system. Once you go in there, you find out half of your beliefs are wrong. When you're dealing with the real thing, it's different. And people at the Power Corporation who work there can tell you, they're doing the best they can.
Okay.
By the way, Cuba, my wife passed away in Cuba.
I'm sorry to hear that.
It was a shock in 2008. Actually, Rick Howard's the first person I talked to. When I got back, I didn't know what to do. I was in shock. I mean, you're going on a cheap tour one day, and next day you're going home with your wife at a morgue in Cuba. It was a shock and a half.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, and Rick, I didn't know. I called into the thing now how stupid it was, but I was just like, what do I do?
Right.
But the thing is, when the states had control of Cuba, literacy was 5%. And it was basically a brothel and a gambling casino and a place for organized crime.
There have been movies written on that. Absolutely.
This is fact. Baptista was not the nicest guy. They backed Trump or Castro because they thought they'd get out of this mess. Now, I was there many times. I've been there probably a dozen. The food is right, is horrible, but you get around that. Their breads are awesome. So we used to bring jam and peanut butter. Their eggs are okay. So they have eggs, toast, and peanut butter and jam. You can get around the fact the food is not the world's best. You can walk anywhere there and be basically safe, more than almost any country in the world. Unfortunately, the Monroe Doctrine, or what Donald Trump calls the Don Rowe Doctrine, means everything in the hemisphere is just to do with as he pleases.
Yeah.
Which means take over Cuba, take over Mexico, take over us, whatever is in the best interest of the United States. Unfortunately, nobody believed when we were trying to tell people that. It's a sad thing. I know there's probably an advertisement going on when I'm talking to you. That's fine. But someday, people will realize, and I think they're starting to know, how dangerous this man is. I'll be dead, but your younger ones will have to suffer for what this clown does.
Barry, appreciate it, sir. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. Open Hour continues after this break. All right, welcome back. Open Hour continues right to the top of the clock. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. Let's say now hello to Keith. Keith, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good, Dan. How are you this morning?
I am still in the dark, but I'm okay. What's on your mind?
Yeah. Well, this power outage is it's kind of hard to put a guy up in a bucket 40 feet in the air when you've got wind gusts like this. It takes time to restore power.
Yep.
And you could have 4,000 or 5,000 people on one circuit, and you get a bump, that puts them out. Doesn't mean you've got all these different outages everywhere. One circuit could put off a bunch of people at one time.
No, I get it. It's a tough job, but they did say that they were able to get some of the crews up into the cherry pickers. So hopefully this will end sooner rather than later.
Oh well, it's going to come to an end. The wind's it's already starting to die down a little bit.
Good.
Now it just takes time. This thing with Cuba,
right,
Venezuela, Iraq. Do you hear a lot now these days about the Epstein files?
Not much at all, to be honest.
And you know why that is?
Because we're being distracted? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Exactly.
It's a big price to pay, though, right? I mean, the billions of dollars that are being spent weekly on that campaign in Iran is going to eat into that massive turnaround that the president has been talking about with his tariffs.
Well, do you think he cares?
No, I don't think he cares at all.
Do you think he cares? No, he doesn't. He hardly mentions the Americans that have already lost their lives. He doesn't want to talk about it. He's a malignant narcissist, and he'll do anything to distract. And I think his party, the GOP, they won't do anything with him because I think a lot of them are just afraid of him because if they speak out against him, well, he will do what he can online to trash them. And I think they're scared of losing their seat of power, and they will get primaried. And that's a lot of them are frightened of that, of losing their power, because you'll just get them primaried and they'll be gone from their district. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. His endorsement carries big weight within the Republican Party.
Well, it certainly does. And he will get rid of anybody that's in his way because he has, right now, he has absolute power. Look the way he talked about Cuba. I could take them over. I could, that's a sure sign of a person that has just absolute power. They love it. He's just a megalomaniac, and it's not going to get any changes until there won't be any major changes until he's gone. And I think this is all planned. Project 2025, when Joe Biden was in power, they had 4 years to put this all together. I think that's just my opinion on where that came from. And when the midterms allegedly are going to happen in November, you're going to see him do anything to have either those canceled or he'll do something. So there will be no midterms because he's there, Dan. I said this a long time ago. He is not leaving. He's there, and he's going to stay there because if he's no longer president, then he doesn't have protection anymore.
Keith,
that's just my opinion.
I appreciate the call. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. Let us now say hello to Sam. Sam, how are you?
I'm doing well, Dan. How are you?
I'm well. What's on your mind today?
I just wanted to comment on the Premier's appearance on Friday.
Okay.
I was hoping to get on and ask him a little question, but you had lots of callers, so I didn't make it. But so first of all, I just wanted to point out one thing I heard that I was really surprised by was the amount of people who were calling him just to congratulate him and give him an attaboy. I
can tell you, Sam, and I don't think I'm giving away any confidences here. I think the Premier was surprised too, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised and a little disappointed. And I think that it kind of, it's great that he changed his mind on some things, but I really think that I think it just kind of shows what a low standard we've learned to hold our politicians to, is that, after a week of thousands of people in the streets and him saying once that he wasn't going to go back on the budget, okay, he finally realized maybe it's not a good idea to gut, respite care programs in rural Nova Scotia for people with dementia. And it's just, to me, that's what it took for him to change his mind. I'm not impressed, and I'm kind of a little disheartened to see how many people are impressed. I mean, hear people saying, "You've got my vote," like you're a good man. I mean, I think it just kind of shows what a low standard we hold our politicians to. That's all it takes to impress people. If you understand what I'm saying.
Oh, I do, Sam. And like I said, I even think that the premier was surprised at the number of people that called him to say what you just explained to us. And he told me on the way out that he was expecting a much rougher ride.
Yeah. And another comment I wanted to make, there was one lady who asked about the wildlife division of the DNR. And that's what I was hoping to get on to discuss. And unsurprisingly, he was very dismissive. I've heard him in the past be always very dismissive whenever a caller on your show questions him about an environmental practice, whether it's, our forestry practices in the province, spraying of glyphosate, the Coastal Protection Act. So when he says he was very dismissive of that lady's concerns and said, it's going to be fine. Nature is going to be fine. We care about nature. Of course we care about nature. This is Nova Scotia. I just don't believe him because I mean, you look at his record of, lying about environmental issues. He said he was going to commit to the protection of 20% of Nova Scotia's land by 2030. And the reality is that we've been having to fight against a regression of that number with him, being open to discussing protected lands.
Golf courses at beaches?
Golf courses on beaches where, highly endangered species like piping plovers are breeding. He lied about the Coastal Protection Act.
Yep. He could have just signed it. It was already done.
It was already done. He could have just signed it, and it would have been amazing. Really, it would have been great. And that's what PEI is working on right now. That's what other states have done. It's what other countries have done, where protecting the coast and access to the coast is just kind of assumed and it's taken for granted. But here we know that we can't because we see no trespassing signs on what used to be, public lands all the time. And, of course, the dismantling of the DNR Wildlife Division. So I truly don't believe that he is that concerned with protecting nature or the environment.
Sam, I appreciate the call, sir.
Thank you.
Have a great day. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. Final word goes to Steiner. Steiner, how are you?
I am good, thank you.
What's on your mind?
I would like to discuss a little bit Nova Scotia Power and the outage because I come from Norway originally, and they are doing much work in power lines to keep trees and everything away. And I can remember when I first came to Canada and to Nova Scotia that the power company at that time used to go over and take away limbs and take away trees that could fall and take out power. And that isn't being done now. In fact, in Colby, that they plant trees right under the power line. I mean, what are we thinking about? Common sense seems to have disappeared. And I must say I compliment all the people from the power company that is fixing things. I think they're doing a great job, and I say we have to be very thankful for them. But why not do more to prevent these things from happening? That's what you're doing with machinery too. You maintain it so that it doesn't break down for you.
Absolutely, Steiner. I totally agree with you. Appreciate the call, sir.
Thank you.
902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. Remember that number. We're going to do this open hour again tomorrow. Don't forget it's Wednesday. That means Dr. John will be here at 11 o'clock. We're going to do the open hour at noon tomorrow. Time for us to take a break. When we come back, would you send him to the moon? Or would you go if you had the offer? We're talking a little bit about moon or lunar travel as we start to hear the more discussions about Artemis heating up. And, of course, all science-related questions as Science Files takes over the airwaves right after the news. You're listening to the Todd Veinotte Show. I'm Dan Alstrand. We're back in minutes. All right, welcome back. It's time for Science Files, everybody. The number is 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. I'm very happy to welcome into the studio, as is tradition here on Tuesdays, and we're in mood lighting today. And that is that giggle is that of Dr. Rob Thacker from St. Mary's University. It's not that I'm trying to be Rick Howe and turn off all the lights in here. It's that we don't have any power.
I was going to joke. I'm seductively side-lit.
See, there you go. Right? It's the light from it's that mood lighting. Anyway, Dr. Rob is here for the next hour to answer your science-related questions. If you have one, 902-405-6000 or 1-877-801-8255. That is the number. Of course, the big news earlier this week in your area expertise, Dr. Rob, was the announcement yesterday, was it, that $200 million will be spent at Spaceport near Canso to a part of a defense contract, and as I understand it, to build some kind of dedicated launch facility for the military.
Yeah, no, this is, how can I put it? Once the announcement was made last November, people were seeing that the clock was ticking and an announcement was coming. Right? There were a few questions of where the money would go, but this is such a turnaround that I've posted on social media that if you told me 10 years ago this is what was going to happen, I would have been like, well, I didn't see that one coming. So this is all about the change in geopolitics in the world, right? And because of the change in geopolitics, it's become very important for us to have our own capacity to be able to launch to space for defense purposes. This is all defense purposes, right? And you may quite legitimately be concerned about what that means for the overall safety of the world going forward. And I think, yes, you actually should be concerned about that. But nonetheless, this is a situation where NATO is interested in having as many different possible accesses to launch facilities as it can around the world, and Canada would provide, or at least this launch site in particular, provides one interesting way of providing sun-synchronous or polar orbital access for NATO. So I think that's a big part of it. We're going to hear more, I'm sure, over the next few days, because there have been other companies with launch vehicles interested in Canso and launching from Canso, right? There's been discussions in the background. And now that there is government money behind, because most of the people felt if this was ever going to happen, it would happen with government money rather than just being commercially run. And here we are, right? So
with this announcement, at least for what we know at this point, are we looking at just basic infrastructure, a concrete pad, and the accoutrements to launch these rockets?
Yeah, I think that they'll be able to get quite a reasonable amount done with this is backdated by a year as far as I understand it. So there's going to be like $40 million in cash for them to do things. Now, admittedly, when you're building site infrastructure, that's going to be eaten quite quickly, right? So this will take a little bit of time, I'm sure. To be honest, I've checked at how much. So Wallops in Virginia is the example that people always talk about of a small spaceport. And it's not actually that small, but anyway, that's run and is very interesting from both a commercial and other perspectives. And so to run Wallops, according to the numbers that I found, they could be wrong, but to the numbers I found, basically it's about $70 million US a year. Right, and so you can do the math on that. That's over 100 Canadian, and then so Spaceport Nova Scotia with $20 million a year for basically leasing one pad. It's not an inconsiderable amount of money, right? It's going to make things possible there that simply weren't possible, at least at the moment, with more commercial backing. And so now this is really going to open things up, and I think what may end up happening is because it is an interesting place to launch from for polar orbits or sun-synchronous, that might possibly create a bit more interest on the commercial side, right?
And that was my next question, is digging into this agreement that was reached or released yesterday. Part of the caveat for the money is that I think it's 90% of that money has to be spent within the borders of Canada. So my question to you is going to be, with that being said, and this caveat on that money, is this is probably a good news announcement for the space industry in Canada.
So let me put it this way: space industry in Canada has been lobbying heavily, and to a certain extent, right? I think they're justified in doing that, right? And that's someone who has a vested interest, obviously.
Right.
But the reality is the investment in the Canadian Space Agency has been very low for a very long time. Even as a fraction of our gross domestic product, it's very, very low, right? I actually wrote articles about this 10 years ago, right? And met with Mark Garneau to talk about it. And nothing really moved the needle, right? And the slightly depressing thing for me is the thing that's moved the needle is the state of the world right now.
And this isn't necessarily about advancing humankind in science.
No,
this is about
not.
protecting our
Right.
backside.
And now anyone who understands the history of space will know that that's been a big factor in funding in the past. In like literally going to the moon was a Cold War race, right? So let's be honest about that. And so at the end of the day, here we are. Will we learn things from this that are not military? Absolutely. Right. As I said, I think this will have an impact on the commercial side, and for sure, right, we will finally see a Canadian launch vehicle. Well, that's going to happen now. I'm pretty sure of that. And orbital launch vehicle, I should say. We've had Black Brant missiles have been able to fly sounding rockets for a very, very long time. I think they might actually be the most launched sounding rocket ever. Those are ones that just go up and come straight back down. They don't go into orbit. So now we will have an orbital capability, and sovereign access to space, as it's being called, and that's a significant step forward for Canada.
902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. Let's go to the telephone lines. We say hello to Rob. Rob, say hello to Rob.
Hey, gentlemen. Actually, it's funny. I was following that spaceport as well. If I could just quick little sidebar, since we're talking about science, and that would be launching and fires. I just wanted to bring up today, Dan, that, or is it Todd?
It's Dan.
It's Dan. It was Dan. Okay. Hey, Dan, the issue is, have you looked at Department of Natural Resource and the fire ban today?
I didn't look today, but I looked yesterday.
Yeah. 8 in the morning till 2, and we're completely red. Not sure scientifically how that makes any sense.
Well, you're on during the fire. I can answer that question, Dr. Rob.
Go for it.
During the fire season, we are unable to burn from 8 o'clock till 2 o'clock every day. That's the way it is.
Yeah, I know. It's been raining all night, though.
I know,
so
but it doesn't matter. You can be in the middle of a thunderstorm. It's the way that the fire ban works is that after 2 o'clock, if it's green, when they put the new numbers out at 2, then you can light your fires from 2 until 8 o'clock the next morning. But from 8 until 2 every day in Nova Scotia, you cannot burn.
And I'm just trying to understand the risk assessment level on that. That's all. I was just trying to
And the reason why I know that, Rob, is I have the very same questions that you do about that and the science that's behind that. But that is the way it is. That's the way it's been explained to me.
Yeah. And I appreciate that. I don't know if everyone in the city or the province understands that today we're completely red. No fires at all in a situation.
So,
I mean, I don't know who'd want to have a fire in a downpour, but it just seems crazy.
I'm sure, given it's a ban from 8 until 2,
right? So at 2 o'clock it'll be green.
Ideas about what that is actually stopping.
Yeah, that's my only question, right?
Because that's stopping anyone doing commercial burns.
Yeah, if we're going to have a rocket launch, would that mean that we can't launch a rocket because there's flames coming out of the rocket?
It's a fair question.
Okay. So if we're going to talk about issues with launching, right, then yes, fire is an issue for sure. But the second thing is, think about what's flying overhead over Nova Scotia all the time. We're right in the middle of an air corridor. Right? So negotiating that is going to be an issue. Now, it can be done, right? But it's going to be an issue.
Yeah, we're a flight path to Europe right above our heads.
Exactly.
For sure. You just have, when it's clear and it's not pouring, you can see the flames flying over it.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to get back to the topic on the launches. That's great. My only issue as a taxpayer is if this is so great, I don't really know if in the time we find ourselves, Nova Scotia is $22 billion in debt, the federal government's in debt. How realistic it is for the federal government to be spending tax dollars. If it's a great idea, let the private sector fund it.
Well, but I mean, that's not really how most things happen in Canada and haven't been for a long time.
Yeah, and I understand that, Rob. I do. But the problem is that we find ourselves in a situation that we're being taxed to death because the governments don't have money. So when the governments want money, they come to the general public to tax us. But yet when they want to spend money, they don't consider that.
Okay.
So that's the issue that I have as a taxpayer.
So here's the economic issue that a lot of people have talked about, right? And this is the fact that businesses won't invest in research and development in Canada. We have quite a conservative research and development culture in Canada compared to the US, for example. And that's been one of the reasons why we come back to basically grants and public funding.
Yep. But again, I don't know if that just because we've done it wrong in the past, we keep doing it wrong. Like, I mean, we don't have the cash as you know, if we want to borrow it, keep borrowing it. That's fine. Look at what the province just did, cutting stuff because we're under strain already as a province and the things they had to cut back on because supposedly we have no money. So, listen,
but this is not money that's being launched into space. This is going to have a significant return on investment, creating local jobs and so on.
Okay. That could be discussed as far as how many jobs we're talking about and what companies would come here and what we have the infrastructure.
It's a combination of that and the defense capability that's really driving this. I mean, let's face it, this is a DND thing.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Again, I just want to bring up from the side of tax dollars and, you know, return on investment. That's the line that's thrown around all the time. And I don't really know if that's a true statement every time it's used.
I think it's reasonable to be skeptical.
Who does the analysis after, Rob, to find out if we truly got a return on investment?
So governments do actually need independent assessments of that. That's required. That's why there are so many contractors on the Hill getting RFP contracts.
No, I know. And that's and all those assessments cost the taxpayer more money. Mm-hmm. So that's the challenge.
But at the end of the day, Rob,
right?
and I appreciate the call, Rob. We're up against the break.
Thank you very much.
And I'm just going to stick you on hold here so you can hear. But at the end of the day, if it's a military contract, then the private sector, how do they fund a military contract, right? The military would have to pay the contractor in order to provide the service, right? The military doesn't have astronauts and rocket builders.
The CSA doesn't have hardly any resources as well. Even the David Florida lab. That's
and I absolutely understand
Rob's,
and I absolutely understand Rob's comment about that. You know, we're broke and we're constantly telling people that we are in these deficits and. Hey, I've made a lot of hay on that over the last couple of weeks with regards to the provincial budget. But all that being said, I mean, I think, and we will reach out, Rob, to the people that live up in Canso and some of their officials and elected people to see what they think about the whole thing. Because if a $200 million investment brings 35 new jobs to Canso, I think that they'll probably consider that to be a win.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about this for a while because, I mean, this is one of the challenges. It's not clear how many jobs are really going to be based around Canso, right? And certainly if you look at the rocket development, that's not going to be based around Canso. That's elsewhere in Canada, not even in Nova Scotia in many cases. So from that sort of like local perspective, yeah, there will be some jobs, right? There will be, for example, and this is the amazing thing, there's going to be tourists coming to see rocket launches, right?
902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. Great points, Rob. I appreciate it. And other Rob, thank you both. We're back after the break. Welcome back to Science Files. He is Dr. Rob Thacker. Good discussion already today. A couple of people on the line, so let's see if we can get to some more calls here, Dr. Rob. And we welcome Ed to the show. Ed, how are you?
Good afternoon. I'm fine, thanks. Gentlemen, there are a lot of people out there praising the warmer weather conditions that we've been having, but over time, weather becomes climate. Mm-hmm. So, Dr. Thacker, can you tell us whether most scientists think global warming is happening, if it is caused by humans, what they think its effects are, and in general, whether they think the effects are good for life on the planet? I'll hang up and listen. Thank you much.
Appreciate that, Ed.
Okay.
That's about a 3-hour program, isn't it, Dr.
I think he probably has had other people other than me, because I'm not a climate scientist. But at the end of the day, Okay, let's give the nuanced scientist answer, which is what you all pay me for. You pay me double.
Right, double or nothing is still nothing.
So in this case, the way scientists handle anything is about looking at the evidence and then making assessments based on the evidence. And so that leads to something called the confidence interval. How confident are you in a result? So the fact that human change of the climate is happening is at around a 95% confidence level, right? Is there any possibility that there is something that deep down there we have missed at around the 5% level, and even smaller than that probably now, right? So that's to say that there are still some things that are not fully understood and worked through and so on, but the vast majority of the processes involved in climate change are understood to a reasonable degree of precision, right? Not perfect. That doesn't exist in science. Never has done, never will do. Okay? And so with that said, then yes, there is a strong scientific consensus, for want of a better word, that there is significant human impact on climate. And over a period of time, that is having a significant impact on both the local and global ecosystems. And so will this lead to a better state of the world for people in general? And I think the overwhelming answer to that is no, it won't. Right? There may be some places where climate change leads to locally warmed climates and less cold weather. But at the end of the day, one of the key things that comes out of climate change is more significant weather swings and extreme weather events, which we're starting to see more and more. Let me give you the classic example of an extreme weather event that was classified originally as 1 in 1,000 in a regular climate is now thought to be about 1 in 100, and that was the heat dome over Western Canada about 4 years ago. Something like that, where you have sustained temperatures of over 40 degrees for 5 days, is deeply problematic from many aspects, both with wildlife and with crop growing and so on. So here is the thing, right? Regardless of whether we talk about what happens to us, most of our food supply comes from outside. So the impact of climate change on food security is the single thing. I know Sylvain Charbon probably has a whole line about that and talking about that. That is one of the most significant factors before we even start worrying about what happens to us, right?
Dr. Rob, when we talk about climate change, and I know that with this can start a very significantly deep rabbit hole, but that being said, one of the counter arguments that I hear frequently to what you just said is that this is part of the progression and from the last ice age, and that the planet warmed during the ice age, and then it melted the ice caps, and then we stopped walking on top of the ice and started walking on the actual ground that was under the ice. And that this is just an extension of that. So let's, I have to give a straight and honest answer. So does the sun impact our climate? Absolutely, yes, it does, right? No question, right? And so there are widely studied cycles, the so-called Milankovitch cycle, right, which shows that, yes, over a long, almost geological, it's not quite geological, but it's close to geological timescale, we do have significant changes in the climate, and there's plenty of evidence we've gone through things like the snowball Earth a long time ago, right? But there's even impacts of the sun's changing its position along the main sequence of the stellar evolution that are involved in that as well. So let's not talk about that. We're talking about something that the evidence shows has happened really very quickly, and it's possible that there may have been sudden climatic shifts in the past, but we don't have any evidence of them because it's very difficult to capture that within the geological record, right? There is some evidence of sudden shifts, for example, around the Mediterranean when the ice started crawling back after the last ice age, and there being sudden shifts there. But even then, what people call sudden in the geological record is a few tens of thousands of years, right? We're talking about things changing within 150 years. And the most ironic thing for me is you can go back to Scientific American articles in the 1880s and people doing the very simplest calculation you can do about the greenhouse effect and saying, well, if we keep on burning all the millions of tons of coal that we're burning every year, this could be a problem in 200 years, right? And here we are 150 years later, and we can see that coming. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. Science Files continues after the news. Folks, welcome back. This is Science Files. The number is 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. He is Dr. Rob Thacker, and he is here to answer your questions. Again, that number, 902-405-6000, or 1-877-801-8255. Lots of calls today, Dr. Rob.
It's rainy.
It's like people are kind of stuck at home with no power. Hello, Carl.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Hey.
This isn't why I called. I'll get to that in just a sec. But on the launching rockets thing, one of my concerns is a lot of these satellites they put up there run on nuclear power. And if you have an anomaly on a launch pad or not long after it launches, I'm concerned about the environment with the uranium or whatever is on board to power these satellites when they're in space.
So just let me jump on something there, Carl. So I know what you're talking about. You're talking about radioisotope generators, of which a few have been deployed in space. Right, there's one on Curiosity and Perseverance, for example. But those are usually reserved solely, as far as I know, who knows what's up there in terms of like defense-based stuff. But again, I don't think they'd really be interested in doing that. So that's reserved for planetary missions, which is a very small fraction of the total number of satellites up there, right? And those are largely off away from the Earth anyway. They're not coming down because of the obvious radiation concerns. I think there has been one example of something coming down with a radioisotope on it, and I believe the Russians had to clean that one up.
So, I mean, if there was an anomaly right on the launch pad, what does that mean for the environment right where it was launched? I mean, if there was one that had that on it.
So it's comparatively rare to get a total loss nowadays, right? So, again, I completely get what you're saying. If the thing was obliterated and shredded, what would that mean? But in many cases, like certainly for radioisotope generators, those are comparatively passive radioactive sources. They're not something that's going to go boom or anything like that. And the overall level of radiation, if it was spread over a large area, the overall level of radiation actually goes down.
I see. And then real quick, this guy named Omar, I don't recall his last name, he won a Nobel Peace Prize for inventing a contraption that's about the size of a shipping container. And they tested this thing in deserts even where there's like less than 20% humidity in the air. And this contraption produces like 245 U.S. gallons a day for drinking water. And my question, are you familiar with this? And
you would have to send me a link because I'm like producing water in a desert. You can do it sort of like at nighttime when things are cooling down, but during the day, I'm sort of like questioning what that is. But if you can send the link, we'd be happy to look.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Carl. Appreciate it. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. Email question next. This comes to us from Joe, and it says, good morning, Dan and Dr. Thacker. Artemis 2 astronauts will travel farther into space than anyone since Apollo. Mm-hmm. He asked the question, what can this mission teach us about cosmic radiation and its effect on humans?
Right, so this is... There will, of course, be specific experiments that are being done on the Artemis mission, but to be honest, this mission is about testing the Orion capsule, right? And so I appreciate that, yes, it will go out beyond the moon, loop back, come back around again, but it's not going to give us the long-term exposure data that is really kind of what's missing, right? And so we do have long-term exposure mission details, obviously, from people who've been on the space station for a very long time, right? But as far as, if I'm really, really honest, I think this is primarily about testing the Orion system, right? And yeah, there will be some smaller experiments that are done, right? Obviously, every sort of like medical trace that you do of an astronaut and so on, that's producing new data that's going to be analyzed to check this and that and t'other. But at the end of the day, this is primarily about testing the Orion capsule.
For those of us that don't know what the Orion capsule is, Dr. Rob,
right. So the Orion capsule is kind of like the heart of the Artemis mission. This is what the astronauts are going to be in. This will dock with whatever landing system they have or what they decide on, whether it's the SpaceX HLS or the Blue Origin system. And so you need to test out the life support systems with people actually on board, right? They've tested it out with no one on board, right? That was the Artemis 1 mission. And now this is the next step of going through and checking out everything's going okay. I mean, there are multiple points within the mission when they will be testing, are we good to go or not? So for example, right, they won't sort of go off the launch pad and go straight to the moon. They'll go off, they'll go into orbit, then they'll decide on whether they're going to do lunar injection, whether all the systems are working and so on, and then they will go off on their translunar injection orbit or injection orbit and off to where they need to go to get around the moon.
Would you go? If the phone rang today and they said, hey, Dr. Robbie got a spot on Artemis 2, would you go?
I'd say, you're mad. That's a tricky question because, yeah, I would like to do it. But also, I've also got this risk assessment thing that goes off in my brain.
If this was young Dr. Rob, that would have been no-brainer, right?
Yeah. Well, the irony of that is when I'm younger, I have more to lose if I pass away.
Yeah, but you're also that...
you have a higher tolerance for risk.
Intestinal fortitude, they would say.
So...
I don't know if I'd go. Being the Vanguard's that's pretty cool, but, I think I'd like to see them get the bugs worked out first.
Yeah, I kind of... Well, so I will say this: it's a NASA rocket, and they're generally really focused on safety, right? They are pretty good about that. It's like with Starliner, everyone was focused on safety, and they could have come back in that. That probably would have been okay, right? But in this case, I think it'll go okay. I really do. All right, if something goes wrong on this, that's a huge black eye for NASA.
For sure.
Right.
And under scrutiny these days.
Absolutely.
That being said, Dr. Rob, you and I were chatting before we go back to the phones here, before we went on the air about, and this goes back to some of the weather questions that we had there before the break. We saw a pretty significant shift in the weather here in Nova Scotia in the last 24 hours. When I left the radio station yesterday and I went home, and I parked my vehicle in my lot, there was a large snowbank that was at the end of the driveway. That was where the plow put the snow all winter, which is normal. That's a Nova Scotian thing, right? Well, I got to tell you, when I got up this morning, that snowbank that was a frozen lump of ice is essentially, it's probably completely gone.
Yep.
I liken it to I call it the hairdryer syndrome, right?
Okay.
This is what my theory is, and I'm just playing this out with you live on the radio.
No. We talked about it. I'm just chuckling to myself.
Right?
Quietly.
Frozen ice has a barrier of cold air around it, right?
Yeah.
That's how it exists, and it keeps things frozen, right? The melting works when the heat makes its way through that cold air barrier and into the ice crystals and gets the water moving and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so there's literally a cold insulating layer in this case over the ice, and if you suddenly have a warm wind, because boy oh boy was
the
it
hairdryer,
night, right? Then you are actually going to create a situation where you can take energy away progressively more rapidly from the ice, and you're going to melt it really quickly, right? That's actually, again, I think one of the things that people have to remember with changes in climate. Right, because if you go from a situation where it's comparatively low wind speeds to high wind speeds, you've got that factor to change the overall ice coverage as well.
So we had a perfect storm. I know that get used too much, but we had temperatures that were in the double digits overnight. We had fog, which we know here in Nova Scotia is it eats snow, and having that wind blowing to keep that air layer off has really. If you'd have told me that snowbank would have been gone in 24 hours, I would have said never. I would have bet money on it.
It's pretty incredible that I can't, looking out the window, can I see any ice? No, I can't see any ice anywhere.
Right. And but the bad news is it's going to -4 tonight. Everything's going to freeze again.
Oh, it's going to be an ice rink and then it'll melt. So it's not going to be good for the roads, that's for sure.
902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. We're going to take a break. Science Files continues on the other side. See you in a bit. All right, welcome back. Science Files continues. He is Dr. Rob Thacker from St. Mary's University. And if you have a science-related question, 902-405-6000 or 1-877-801-8255. Dr. Rob, let's go to the phones and say hello this afternoon to John. John, how are you?
Not too bad. How's everybody there?
Good. Your question for the doctor, please.
Yeah, I do. Doctor, I've been thinking, especially over this last couple summers, if you remember back in the 80s,
I can.
What's the saying? If you remember the 80s, you weren't there? Is that the same?
But I wasn't in Canada at the time.
There was a lot of buzz and concern about the ozone layer, which had a hole in it.
Yep.
And I do believe I have heard many, many years later that was no longer an issue. So my question is...
It's a little bit subtle. Like there's some things we've done that are really good, but there's still some other things in the background that are a concern. Yeah, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. So is that why nowadays, and I hope it's not because of my age, but who knows, even if you're driving in the car and you got your arm partway out the window, the sun, you can actually feel it burning your skin, where I can remember back when I never felt it like that before.
Mm-hmm. So the question is the sun getting more intense because of things like climate change?
So here's the thing. The actual, what we call the solar constant, isn't changing significantly, right? So the actual variation in the overall sun's output, if you compare the peak of a solar cycle every 11 years to the trough, that's about, I've just got my calculator open, 1.00007 difference, right? So it's not particularly big, right? So the thing that I would say I noticed growing up was I got sunburnt growing up, right? But I was getting sunburn in the UK where the local temperatures didn't get much beyond 26, 27, right? We clearly are getting days when we have a lot warmer, right? A lot warmer days. But the overall intensity of the sun, right, in terms of the number of watts per meter squared that's coming down, that's actually still about the same, right?
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, very good. I just noticed that you burn much faster now.
No, I'm trying to work through in my head, is there going to be anything significantly different around our latitude with the amount of UVA blockage or UVB, and there's UVC as well. So is there anything happening that maybe, I mean, we're fairly far north, right? So there's a possibility, I suppose. There's still some sort of change in the overall UV dose, but overall, the solar constant is pretty much the solar constant. It's in the name.
Thanks, John. Appreciate that, sir. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. There is no doubt, Dr. Rob, that the sun is much more intense the closer you get to the equator.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
When I travel, when I go to the Caribbean, the time that it takes me to burn is much less there than it is here.
Yeah, absolutely. So then you're looking at less. You're literally going through, well, depending upon what time of year, but most of the time you're going through less atmosphere. Right. So there's going to be literally less of an atmospheric column to come through. Again, there is obviously some blockage of UV. Right. So again, we'd have to do all of the angles and so on, the integrals across the angles, which is a lot of fun. But the main thing is to be aware of is that when you're at the equator, if the sun is perfectly overhead, that's like the maximum amount of exposure you can get. If you're literally sunbathing in that, the rays are coming down. There's no what we call trigonometric angle associated with
deflection.
Right? It's coming all the way down and it's hitting you. Whereas if it's off at sort of 45 degrees or even 30 degrees or something like that, then you have what we call the trigonometric factor, and that is reducing your overall exposure because of that. It's literally the quality of light is not as strong because it's coming at an angle, right? And so that does impact your overall amount of exposure.
Then would that mean that it would be easier or better for somebody to observe a night sky along the equator than it would be, say, up here?
So the better way to put it is it easier or harder to observe the night sky through a bigger or smaller atmospheric column, as we call it? Right. And so in this case, it's obviously better to observe through the smallest atmospheric column you can. And that generally means looking to what we call the zenith, which is a bit straight overhead.
The rum's better in the Caribbean, too.
Just be careful that doesn't lead to the sunburn.
Well, that's usually what happens. Is everything is it's a big circle, a circle of life, right? Anyway, before we get too far down that rabbit hole, 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. Dr. Rob, you sent me an article from the UK here as in preparation for the show today, and we talked about circadian rhythms when it came to the time change, and it looks like there's some research that suggests that blue, the color of the spectrum, can be used to help in the treatment of mental illness.
Yeah. So anyone who's flown, I think this was actually the 737 MAX 8s had this on the trip from Halifax to London. So you get on board and they'd put like an orangey color scheme on. Right. And then it would get darker, you'd go to sleep, and then when they want everyone to wake up in the morning, it's like blue, right? And so you're like, oh, pretty lights. And so this is basically that idea applied in a mental health hospital.
Okay.
Right? And so they've taken all of the light systems, and so after 6 p.m., they take out the blue end of the spectrum, right? And then people are exposed to this more red light, so you don't have that typical blue light, which we talked about this in terms of like cell phones, computer screens, and so on. They have a lot of blue in them, right? And so they're taking that out, and you're thinking, does this really have any effect? And the answer is, for people who have mental health concerns, who have displaced circadian rhythms, it does seem to help, right? And so where it helps most, interestingly, and you won't be surprised that this was one of the key things that the staff on the ward noticed, was a reduction in aggression, right? And there could be many reasons for that, aside from just the light exposure. It could be how people are sleeping after having no blue light or something like that. But nonetheless, they found that by changing the light spectrum, right, they were able to get people out of the ward in about the same amount of time, but with generally better clinical diagnoses and specifically, as I already mentioned, reduced aggression.
Here I thought that was the stuff on the screens that was making me aggressive, and not the screen blue itself.
Well, in the big scheme of things, I have to be honest and say that is probably a bigger impact factor. But at the end of the day, they're talking about the occurrence of reductions in aggressive behavior, but it's a fairly large range, I will say, but it's all in the positive sense of between 8 and 76% of cases. That is a very, very large range. So I'd like to know more about that, but that's still a positive impact.
We talk about blue light a lot, and to the point where you're on screens probably more than I am, Dr. Rob, and people are wearing lenses that diffuse the blue light in an effort to stop themselves from harm.
Well, how can I say? So personally, I've noticed that if I get off, and sorry, this is always going to come back to like, is it the stuff that's on the screen versus the actual blue on the screen? But I try and make sure if I really need sleep, I'm getting off a screen by about 9 o'clock, right? If I really need to get to sleep. And then I can normally fall asleep fairly easily by 10, right? But if I'm working, very often I'll go to bed and my brain will still just be wired. Now, I think that's largely what I was doing as opposed to the light, right? But if, I don't know, I have some mental concerns about having a big light screen in front of my face, right?
Right.
I really do.
Leave them, turn them off after supper, Dr. Rob.
I would love to, I would love to be able to do that, but...
Me too.
So you will laugh. I mean, maybe people don't understand this. Like, I'm a professor, so when I'm at work, I have lots of meetings. I'm doing my teaching, but I have to prepare my lectures. So
Correct.
When do I do that? I do that when I go home. So it's not a case like I can go home and just switch off. And like my partner is always like frustrated about this. We go home and then we get like 3 or 4 hours to do stuff that we couldn't do when we were at work.
Homework never ends.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Rob. I appreciate it.
And thanks, everyone, for the great questions.
We'll see Dr. Rob here next week for Science Files. Thanks to all of you. Dial the numbers and join the conversation. I truly appreciate it. Thank you to all of our guests today who joined our show to impart us with their knowledge. I learned something each and every day that we do this here on the program. Tomorrow, of course, is the Wednesday edition of the program. That means that we will change things up a little bit at 11 o'clock. Dr. John returns to the fold, and he'll be here to answer your medical-related questions. And I'm looking forward to that after having him off last week. 12 o'clock, we'll open up those telephone lines once again to give you an opportunity to comment on the issues of the day. And in today's world, with the way things are unfolding as quickly as they're unfolding, who knows what we'll be talking about tomorrow. I think that's part of the fun of the open hour. And, of course, we will also be talking to some interesting guests and hope you learned something out of there, just like I do each and every day. My enduring gratitude to Vanessa Vandenez on the other side of the glass. Cannot do this show without her. Period. She does fantastic work each and every day. It looks like the storm's starting to let up, folks. Anecdotally, hearing the winds are dropping off. The power numbers, though, are not. Well, maybe they are a little. We're under 20,000 now, sitting around 19,849. Hopefully the power will be back on here at the radio station for us tomorrow, although I am getting kind of used to this dark stuff, except it makes me sleepy. Until tomorrow, everybody, be well, and remember, it's important to be kind to one another.